welcome to this Facebook Live here in Washington, D.C. I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, and you're joining me outside the US Supreme Court, a beautiful building. And it's the highest court in the land. It's here that some key decisions have been made over time. It's here that school segregation was ended in the civil rights era. More recently, it was this court that decided to legalise, gay marriage and end the ban on gay marriage. So gay marriage is now legal across the country. And yesterday, another big decision was made. It was a victory for President Trump and his signature travel ban. The Supreme Court here ruled that largely that travel ban should come into effect. A huge win for the Trump administration, because you may remember that travel ban has been sitting in the courts for months since the president became president and signed that executive order. So we want your questions and comments. If you want to know what this now means for people coming from various countries to the US and for the US refugee program. Now, I'm joined by my colleague Anthony Zurcher. Hello there, Anthony.
Hi there, how you doing?
Good, thanks. It's a lovely day here in Washington.
Beautiful.
And this decision by the court, that was a huge win for the president. Let's go back to basics, because in January, the president sat in the Oval Office, signed an executive order saying he wanted to bring in a travel ban.
Right.
That didn't quite work out back then.
No, it didn't. And let's even go back a little bit farther. During the campaign in December 2015, Donald Trump said he wanted to close the U.S. border to all Muslims. He became president, and the travel ban was the next step for him as far as his immigration policy. He said he was going to close it to people, immigrants, refugees from 7 nations, Iran, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Sudan, Libya, and Yemen. Because they didn't really do a whole lot of preparation, they rolled it out and caught a lot of people in the implementing agencies and immigration officials, the airlines, all by surprise. People got tied up in transit, people got sent back. There were massive protests, there were lawsuits filed, and it got tied up in the courts very quickly.
And there was a lot of confusion, but the bottom line is that it got logged up in the courts. Why was that?
Well, the confusion actually was part of it. A judge in Seattle said because of the implementation, because people didn't know what the policy was, that it was not legal to implement it in that way. Also looked at the idea that this constituted religious discrimination, because the 7 countries were predominantly Muslim countries, to close the border to people who are of specifically one religion violates the Constitution. They got tied up, and then appellate courts held it up. They came up with a second travel ban.
Okay, so the president tried to get through his first travel ban. That was held up in the courts. Then he had a second go at it, and that new version meant that there were some changes. 6 countries that ban applied to, and also the Syrian refugee ban was taken off. So it was basically a suspension of the US refugee program for, was it 120 days, Anthony?
I believe so.
And also a temporary suspension of people coming from those 6 countries. So that's what it was, but it still ended up in the court, a legal back and forth until it got here to the Supreme Court. And yesterday, the decision made by the justices here was to partially allow that ban to come into effect. So what was the headline decision that came out of yesterday?
Okay, well, here's what it means. Those 6 countries, people from those 6 countries, they can be blocked from entering the U.S. Their refugees and immigrants can be blocked from entering the U.S. if they don't have what the court termed as bona fide connections to the U.S., either people or organizations within the U.S. That means if you're coming from Iran, one of the countries covered, you either have to have family in the U.S., you have to have an employer waiting for you in the U.S., or you have to have a school and university where you're going to attend regularly.
And I should just say, Anthony, though, the text of the Supreme Court ruling said that somebody has to have a bona fide connection to a person or an entity in the United States. But there's now a lot of legal experts here in Washington and across the country trying to work out what that means. Obviously, that was your interpretation, but entity and family member, how far would the relationship have to be with someone? I mean, that's what lawyers are now trying to work out, aren't they?
Right, that's exactly it. I mean, they specifically said family members, immediate family members. They said employer, they said school. But we don't know whether that employer is a job that you might have to interview for a job, possibly. You don't know family members that your second cousin once removed. I mean, the court said that there has to be a real connection. It has to be legitimate, but who's going to review that? The courts are going to review that. You're going to see lawsuits springing up out of this, exactly the limits, the definitions of it. But the thing that the court justices particularly said was that presidential power on immigration, on preserving national security, outweighs the interest of people who are abroad who do not have connections to Americans. So the president has sweeping authority. The court essentially reaffirmed that here.
And that's what this Supreme Court does. I'm just going to take a question here from Kevin Smith. Kevin, you're asking me, or you're saying there are no protesters over the Supreme Court's decision yesterday. You're right. Let's just take a look back at the court here. One protester there. Hello there. Have you just got here today?
No, I come periodically.
You're a regular protester, are you?
Sort of.
What's your name?
Gene Coulter.
Gene. And what are you protesting?
The courts in the United States are corrupt top to bottom, states, federal, doesn't matter.
So you're not here specifically because of the decision on the travel ban?
No, that was just coincidence.
Coincidence. Were there people here yesterday protesting the travel ban? Someone's asking us, so.
There were a small number of people, but I think basically they were told, I'm collecting signatures, so I don't need any special permits. If you're trying to have a protest, you actually have to have permits, I believe.
Right, okay, so that explains the question that we got there from Kevin. But there are a few news crews here today. Obviously, the decision was made yesterday morning, so perhaps there would have been more people down here. We've got a few more comments here. Clary's asking, why are there cameras out there now? There's always cameras here, just in case something happens. But of course, on big days, I covered the legalisation of gay marriage. There were loads of cameras here, of course, for big landmark decisions. A few more.
Interject there. This is the last day the Supreme Court justices are within the court. They issued their final decisions yesterday, but they did decide some extra cases to consider in the fall term today. So there were probably people doing lives. After this, the summer recess begins, and then they pretty much pack up. There's not a whole lot of action in the court after that.
Get a nice long summer break. Michelle Watmo, you're asking, what does it mean? Well, basically, it's kind of what Anthony said, Michelle. It means that if you're coming from those 6 countries, so which country was taken out?
Iraq.
Iraq. So all the other countries that were mentioned, we can stick a story in so that you know the 6 countries. If you're coming from those 6 countries, but if you have a family connection or your student connection, visa or something, student visa, that kind of thing, or maybe an employer connection, you can still come. So who wouldn't be able to come then from those 6 countries?
People who have no, according to the court, bona fide ties to the U.S. So no family members, no employers, no school waiting for them to attend. I think the thing to remember here is that the Department of Homeland Security issued a statement yesterday saying that they're going to implement this in a professional fashion. They want to, right now they're busy trying to work out the details of this. The more details they work out before it actually goes into effect. I think it could be several days before the borders are closed to the people covered by that order. And we will hopefully see more details about it because I think the American government doesn't want a replay of the chaos from that first order where people were getting on planes, arriving in the U.S., and then being turned away by immigration officials. They need to spell it out, otherwise the courts may step in again.
Question here from Jared. Jared, you're asking why they picked those 6 countries. I'm right in saying that those countries had already been kind of earmarked for some restrictions under the Obama administration.
Right, exactly. It was a visa waiver program under the Obama administration, basically, that the U.S. was not granting visa waivers to people from those countries who are coming here from Europe. So say you were a European citizen with a background in Syria, you would not automatically be able to come in without getting a visa first. So those 6, actually 7 countries were on it, and Donald Trump and his administration point to that and say, no, these were already countries we already had. That's why we included them.
Quick question here from Andrew. Andrew's saying, when does the travel ban go into effect? From what we understand, the State Department says within 72 hours. Does that mean that some people who are travelling might not know whether they can enter the US or not? Or will most people already have visas anyway?
Well, they already have visas, but they could be blocked if depending on the interpretation. We don't really know, but 72 hours, I think it will know definitively who can and can't come into the country. I think right now, if you got on a plane, you had a valid visa, you're coming from Libya or Yemen or Somalia, you could get into the country because it has not gone into effect yet.
And it's worth mentioning that the Yemeni government expressed their disappointment at this ruling. They say that they work very closely with the US when it comes to the war on terror. And yesterday there was a statement from the Yemeni government saying they were very disappointed about this.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, there's, we're going to see what the implications of this as far as foreign policy go. But The U.S. is trying to build relations in the Middle East, is trying to implement its foreign policy, and this, in some ways, according to critics, would undermine that because it makes it look like the U.S. is taking unilateral action without clear justification.
But the other side of the coin here from Sonachi Hansen, who says it's a good step. Every government has a responsibility to protect its citizens from danger. Just as we wrap up, Anthony, has the president tweeted on this? What's his reaction been to this?
Well, he did a victory lap on Twitter yesterday. He boasted about the fact that this was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. And I should point out, this is just a lifting of a temporary ban. In October, the Supreme Court is going to consider this case on the merits as a whole. Basically, the lower courts had put everything on hold. They said it probably was going to be ruled unconstitutional. We can't let it go into effect. The court justices yesterday said, no, the president has sweeping power on national security. We're going to defer to his judgment. And then in October, we're going to have lawyers on both sides come in, argue the merits of the case, and then we will issue a decision. But of course, by that time, the 90 days that they had said they needed to revise immigration policy will already gone through. So they may decide the whole thing is moot anyway.
Right, exactly. But a victory nonetheless for President Trump, and certainly his supporters will feel emboldened by that too. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll just swing the camera around because we do have quite a nice view here. We're also right by the US Capitol. So that is where senators and congressmen and women sit as well. So this is kind of where we are in Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for joining us here.